Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live on air or online at any of your favorite podcast venues like iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn app, smart speakers, Apple, all those. And also, of course, you can download our own award-winning WHPC app. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I am so happy to have on board our guest, Dr. Udo Erasmus. Dr. Udo has a PhD in nutrition as well as an MA in psychology and is an internationally known authority on fats and oils. He's a consultant to the dietary supplement industry and has literally made thousands of TV and radio appearances in many areas of the world. He's an author of a breakthrough diet called the Right Fat Diet and also a book called Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill, which compiles over 20 years of research on a term that you may well know now because of Dr. Udo's work, which is called the importance of essential fatty acids. So thank you so much for joining us today, Udo Erasmus.
Thank you, Ellen. It's a pleasure.
Now, I was telling you, so I'll share with the audience as well, that I've been doing this show here on this station, WHPC, since 1990, and other shows I started in 1987. And way back then, early on, I had you on as a guest because I am a frequenter of health food stores. I was then and even now. And then there were very few oils, and at some point yours came out and you started doing a big media blitz about the importance of healthy fats. And I was so impressed that we, reached out and invited you on way back then, and here we are still doing that today. So I would say you are one of the most knowledgeable people about essential fatty acids.
Well, let's put it this way. Even if I was mediocre, I should be pretty good by now because I've been doing it for over 40 years.
You're right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. What led you to when you first came out with the discussion about fats being healthy, it seemed to go against the grain?
Yeah, because in 1977, the McGovern report came out and they put carbs at the bottom of the food pyramid for the foods we should eat the most of, put oils on top for the foods we should eat the least of. And that was just before I got poisoned by pesticides in 1980. And I had good background in biochemistry and genetics and biological sciences, where you study the normal functioning of normal creatures. So it's a kind of a study of health, although nobody calls it that. And so I had a really good background in that. When I got poisoned, the doctors didn't have anything for me. So I decided to try and figure it out myself because I had the background. If I didn't have the background, I don't know, I probably would have just folded up and died. But so I started looking in the research, and I was looking at everything that has to do with health because the body's made out of food, water, and air. At that point, I was only thinking about food. And the idea is that if your body is made out of food and it turns over every year about 98%, like 98% of the atoms in your body today will have been removed and replaced if we get together a year from now. So that means your body is a major construction site, always under construction. And if something goes wrong, then what you need to do is you need to raise your standard of food intake. And within a year, 98% of your body will have been rebuilt to a higher standard. That's what is called healing. That's why we can heal, because the body's always turning over. But you have to raise the standard to get a better body. And that's just like how it is. If you want to wreck yourself, then you lower your standard. If you do that deliberately, you could basically get any disease you want if you know the details of it, but just by changing the way you eat in a bad way. Of course, most people want to have better health, so raising the standard is important. It's a little more effort, but the results are spectacular.
So why is it, wait a minute, why is it a little bit of effort? I mean, really, it's just a little bit of knowledge, because then if you just have the correct things to eat around, it's not really more of an effort, except choosing them.
It's an effort only from the perspective that we have a lot of convenience foods. You know, stuff that you can grab and eat, partly because they have a very long shelf life because they never spoil. But in order to do that, they can't be fresh foods. So they have to be processed foods, and in processing, sometimes toxic molecules are added, or some molecules are damaged and become toxic, and some of the nutrients we need are removed. But they're convenient, so you can flip them under your bed and, you know, have a midnight snack for the next 50 years on the same batch of food that you bought with an endless shelf life.
So you're talking about what is now, I just want to say what is now called, it's like a newer word, but you've been talking about it, like you said, for 40 years. What they're talking about now is they're calling it ultra-processed food.
Yeah, and the more it's processed, you know, most of the health, like in nature, the standard for eating for creatures was fresh, whole, raw, organic. I would say for human beings, mostly plant-based, because we weren't that good in hunting because we can't run as fast and we can't bite as hard. And when we only had rocks to hunt with, we came home empty-handed a lot. So when you come home empty-handed, you go outside and you eat vegetables because they don't run away and they don't fight back and they're easy to hunt down and kill. But it's supposed to be fresh, whole, raw, organic. And if you look in your kitchen, or not you, but anybody who's listening, look in your kitchen. How far away have you gone from fresh, whole, raw, organic? In that gap between what you're doing and fresh, whole, raw, organic is where most of our degenerative diseases come from.
I totally agree. And it's just astonishing. As you know, because you study things like numbers, you can actually see the increase in degenerative illness as more and more processed food became the diet.
Yeah. Now, when I started, I got into fats because they were contradictory. I read a study that said omega-6 is an essential fatty acid. It's an essential nutrient, which means you can't make it from anything else in your body. You have to have it to live and be healthy, and therefore you have to bring it in from outside. That's number one part of the definition. Number two, if you don't get enough, your health deteriorates. And if you don't get enough long enough, you die. This is how important these essential nutrients are. That's number two. Number three is the good part, is if you're deteriorating because you're not getting enough of an essential nutrient, but before you die, you bring enough of it back into your body, into your diet, then all of the problems that come from not getting enough are reversed. Because life knows how to make a body that works, provided you take responsibility for making sure all of the essential building blocks that life requires to make a body that works land in your body. That's the only responsibility we have. So I got this study. It says omega-6 is an essential nutrient and you have to have it. And the very next study I got, it says omega-6 gives you cancer and kills you. And my head exploded.
Wow. Yeah. That is, it was a lot of people say that. It's hard to read studies because they seem to contradict each other, just what you're explaining to us.
Right. And so my head exploded and I said, well, how can that be? I have to have it to live and be healthy, and then it gives me cancer and kills me. Now, wait a minute. There's something wrong with that picture. And it was that contradiction and trying to understand why two studies could come up with opposite results on the same molecule. It got me to look into how oils are made, and I realized that oils, the way we usually get them, the colorless, odorless, tasteless oils that are everywhere, the industry was interested in a long shelf life, but oils that contain omega-6 and omega-3 essential fatty acids are very sensitive to damage by light, oxygen, and heat. And so what they do is they mess it up with chemicals, sodium hydroxide and phosphoric acid, and then they bleach it, and then they heat it to frying temperature to get rid of half of the pesticides. The other half stays in, and they try to get an oil that by nature has a short shelf life, but they want to have a long shelf life because that gives them economies of scale in large markets. And then I started looking at that, and then I called them and I said to them, why do you do this? You know it does damage to the oil. About 0.5 to 1% of the oil is damaged.
Wait a minute. You called them. Who do you call?
I called the American Oil Chemist Society in Champaign, Illinois, which is the umbrella organization for the oil manufacturing industry. Said, I want to talk to a researcher. I said, and I said to him, well, why do you do this when you know it does damage to the oil? And he said, well, one of the reasons we do that is because we can get rid of half of the pesticides in the oil by heating the oil to frying temperature in a process called deodorization. And of course, I had been poisoned by pesticides. So in my head, I'm going, wait, the other half of the pesticides stay in the oil? I didn't even know there were pesticides in the oil. And so I said to him, well, why don't you start with organically grown seeds? Then you don't have to do that. And there was a long silence at the end of the phone. And I waited. And then he was really angry. He says, I don't know what your problem is. The oil's only 1% damaged. It's 99% good. And if you got 99% on an exam, you'd be damn happy, wouldn't you? So now I'm backing off. I said, well, maybe I'm overreacting. So I decided to do the math. So I decided to ask the question. If you have a tablespoon of an oil that is 1% damaged by the processing, how many damaged molecules will you get in that tablespoon? And I ask people when I do live lectures all the time, and they always estimate at least 1 billion times too low. There's actually 60 quintillion damaged molecules in a tablespoon of oil that is 1% damaged. Now, we underestimated by 1 billion times, so that means we're doing 1 billion times more damage to ourselves than we think we are. And so then I ask the question, so if you found out next time you go get in your car that your chance of crashing and dying was 1 billion times higher than you thought it was, would you get in the car? And I was like, no, I'm sorry, I'd walk to New York.
Oh, interesting.
And because we don't realize, and then so I asked the question because we need to stop and think, what are we doing? We're taking not just 1 tablespoon, usually 2 to 4, and then we fry those oils. So you have to multiply that number by another 3 to 6 times because you do more damage by frying. Frying is the worst thing we've ever invented to do to food because it burns and wrecks and turns food into poison. And then you have pesticides in there, and then they're in plastic bottles. The oil swells plastic. Plastic leaches into oil quicker than into water. And then you do that for 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 years. And then you're surprised when you get some kind of I had a friend who always said, I don't know why I got these problems. I always ate good. Yeah, but they didn't know what I'm just telling you. That most people still don't know that. And I've been talking about it for 40 years. The industry is certainly not putting out the fact that their oil is 1% damaged or 0.5% damaged. So then I decided we should make oils with health in mind, and I developed a method for making oils with health in mind. Start with organically grown seeds. They go in glass bottles, nitrogen flushed. You have to make a very tight system so no light, no heat, no oxygen gets to the oil from the time it's closed in the seed in nature's packaging, through the pressing, the filtering, the settling, the filling, until it's in a brown glass bottle, nitrogen flushed, in a box, in the fridge, in the factory. So we keep light, oxygen, and heat from damaging the oils. And that's how you make oils with health in mind. So I am credited with starting an industry of making oils with health as opposed to shelf life in mind.
And when your oils first came out, I'm thinking back that you might have had a picture of yourself on the label, but also definitely it was the first one I really saw in a very thick, different kind of plastic, black bottle.
Yeah, we started with flaxseed oil because it has the most omega-3. So let me tell you the other half of the story. We get enough omega-6, but it's partially damaged. So we just talked about that. Omega-3 was only established as essential in 1981, the year after I got poisoned. So my timing was perfect to get at the head of the omega-3 parade. And omega-3 is 5 times more sensitive to damage than omega-6, so it's a nightmare to work with. There are fewer sources, and 99% of the population does not get enough omega-3 for optimum health. So I said, flax oil, richest source of omega-3, lousy source of omega-6. But if we can make flax oil with health in mind, this is the hardest oil to work with, then any other oil we'd ever want to make would be a piece of cake. So we started with flax oil to bring the omega-3s back. And by the way, I got so excited when I found out almost everybody could benefit from flax oil because they get the missing omega-3s, which are also essential by the same definition that I talked about of omega-6s. And then, so we started doing that, and we were on fire. We were so excited. I was saying, oh my God, we could help almost everybody. And there's something that feels really good in your heart when you're helping, when you're making things better for people. And it's just like we're built, that's built into us, I think. And so we started doing that. And then after a while, I used flax oil as the only source of fat in my diet. And within 3 months, I became omega-6 deficient.
Wait. How did you know that? That means you must have been getting it tested.
Yeah, no, I know. I got dry eyes, skipped heartbeats, arthritis-like pain and finger joints, and thin, papery skin. Those are classic omega-6 deficiency symptoms. They're on the list. And fixed it by eating sunflower seeds because they only have omega-6s and no omega-3s. So that brought the balance back. And at that point, I decided we need to make a blend where people can't become deficient. Flax oil is a poorly balanced oil, great source of omega-3, lousy source of omega-6. And you need omega-6s made with health in mind. That's why they're in the blend. So instead of 4-to-1, the ratio between omega-3 and omega-6, the blend is 2-to-1. And 2-to-1 is sustainable. So we developed that. So we developed flax oil in 1986. And I developed the blend 1994.
And I remember all of those. And I want to tell our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. You can always listen live or online at nccradio.org or on iHeartRadio or any of your podcast venues. And today, our guest is Dr. Udo Erasmus, who is really a well-known nutritionist with a real focus on his understanding of oils, which we're doing our show about today. And you can find him at udoerasmus.com. That's udoerasmus.com, and we'll have a live link on the archive, and that will be there after our show. So that's fascinating information. Go ahead.
There's also Udo's Choice, udoschoice.com. That's where I talk about the oils and the enzymes and probiotics that I work with and the greens and all that.
Okay, that's great to know. And also you should let your publicist send those links so I can have those. udoschoice.com. That's another good place to find out this information. Yeah. So what you're talking about is that people, if they're just eating like what we call a standard American diet, and mostly they're getting an overabundance of the really toxic oils, none of which are natural. I mean, they might be natural, but not by the time they're processed and hydrogenated and all those kinds of things. Now, what about the regular omega-6 oils that might occur naturally in whole foods?
Yeah, the omega-6s in whole foods are in their natural state. They're not damaged. They still contain their minor ingredients, their antioxidants, the anti-inflammatories that are in the foods. So in whole foods is a good way to get them. The question becomes, well, why not just get all your oils from whole foods? And so I put that one to the test too. I decided just to get my oils from seeds, which is 5 tablespoons of flaxseed. That's as much as I could take. That absorbs 6 times its weight in water because it's got this mucilage fiber on it. So there's 30 tablespoons of flax, hydrated flax, and then 3 tablespoons of sunflower and sesame seeds to get the 2-to-1 ratio that we work with in the blend. And I use that as my only source of fat. And we measure optimum intake by how your skin feels. If your skin is dry, you need more oils because omega-3 and 6 together form a barrier in the skin against the loss of moisture and give you soft, smooth, velvety skin. And skin gets them last and loses them first because the internal organs get priority on them, because you can live without dry skin, but if your heart dried out, you'd be history. And so nature sets it up so that your skin gets them last and loses them first. In winter, you need more than in summer because your body burns more oil for heat, to keep you warm. And so I use about 4 tablespoons in winter, and I use 2 or 3 in summer. And even in summer in California, when it was warm, when I needed less oil, I could not keep my skin from drying out. So my answer from my body is, seeds and nuts are good, and I eat them, I use them. But if your skin is still dry when you eat the seeds and nuts that you do, then take additional oil, mix it in food, and spread its intake out over the course of the day. So that was my conclusion. Nature's mandate is not optimum health, because nature needs you healthy enough to grow up, healthy enough to reproduce, healthy enough to raise your children. And when your children don't need you anymore, then nature doesn't need you anymore either.
That's an interesting perspective, as you and I are, way past that age at this point, although we weren't when we did our first shows together. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. And so if you're suboptimal in your health, then you get recycled quicker as you get older and your machinery starts to run slower. So my view is, it's not optimum health is not necessarily nature's mandate. Now, for some people, they might be able to get all their oil from seeds and nuts. I can't do it. And that's why I use oils. And they're good in foods, because they enhance flavors and they improve the absorption of oil-soluble nutrients. That's why I always recommend use them in foods. So put them in shakes and put them in smoothies and put them in salad dressings, and use lots of spices, because spices are very, very rich in antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. And, don't use oil off a spoon. Lots of people do it. I've never recommended that. Oil belongs with food.
So even with your own good quality oils, you don't suggest just taking it like that?
No, I don't. And, sometimes people say, I don't like the taste of your oil. So I say, okay, well, how'd you take it? Well, I take it off a spoon. Oh, yeah, okay. So when's the last time you took cooking oil off a spoon? Oh, I never do that. Well, why are you doing it with mine? Right? Oil belongs with food. I put it with food all the time. What I do is I get tahini, and I dump the tahini oil, which is an omega-6 oil, sesame oil, and I put in my oil because it's a better oil. It has omega-3 and 6 and has a better ratio and has all the other ingredients that are in it. And then I mix that up, and then I put in a whole bunch of spice powders, including clove and cayenne and ginger, turmeric, cinnamon, ashwagandha, amla, bacopa. So I put a whole bunch. There's a few other ones. I put the spices and mix those into the tahini with Udo's oil, and then I dip my raw vegetables in it. I love broccoli, and that's how I eat my raw vegetables. It's very tasty, and it's very, very good for health. I'm 81. I'm still firing on at least 2 cylinders. So
you certainly are. You're doing this show right.
So something apparently that is working.
Now, before we leave, I want to talk about something that you discuss in depth. We'll just be able to touch on it because we have something called the right fat diet. But how is it that fat is linked to the overweight epidemic?
Well, I think it's a 6-year-old thinking. It's kind of like eat fat, get fat, right? There's a logic to it, but it's completely wrong. Most of the overweight comes from carbohydrates. And that started in 1977 with the McGovern report on nutrition and health. He was a senator in the U.S. Senate. And he put carbs on the bottom and fats at the top. At the top is what you eat the least. And we started eating more carbs. I would have put greens on the bottom because you can't get fat on greens. And we started eating like that, and in 20 years, overweight went from 25 to 60% of the U.S. population. And nobody questioned the food pyramid. They just kept eating the food pyramid. And I call carbs undeclared fats, because if you eat more carbs than you burn, your body has to turn them into fats for storage. That's where the most of the overweight comes from. The other part of the overweight is from inflammation.
So you're talking about like bread and baked goods and things like that, not so much your fatty foods.
White sugar, white flour, bread, grains, even grain. I get fat on grains. Even whole grains, I can get fat on them. Very easy. So I'm paid a lot of attention. I eat a lot of greens, and I eat mostly seeds and nuts. And I don't have bread in my house. I don't have noodles in my house. I don't buy cookies and, all of that stuff. I get fat really easily. So they're, like I say, I undeclared fats. If you burn them, they're okay. If you don't burn them, you're going to wear them.
Right. Well, especially in baked goods, if you have one of those paragraphs, which I always eat things with no paragraphs on them, but things with paragraphs on them, it will say hydrogenated oil.
Oh yeah, that's another damage that turns into trans fatty acids, and trans fatty acids double risk of heart attack, interfere with reproduction in both male and female animals. We don't have any human studies on reproduction, and they increase your risk of diabetes. And they mess up your immune system, because they don't belong in your body. There's a few in dairy, which is the downside of dairy too, but you don't get them in nature out of the seeds and the seed oils. So they're an industrial product that was used to harden oil so they could make cheap butter substitutes like margarines and shortenings. And of course now they have to be put on the label in the U.S. and although they're still being used in a lot of countries that haven't made laws against them.
Yeah, that's true. They did change the labeling laws, although they used to be very popular, but not so much now. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, that is great information. So I want to thank you so much for being our guest today, right here on Herbally Yours. And recommend that our people do visit you at udoschoice.com for more information, or udoerasmus.com.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, too. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in again to Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.